Welcome to the Lawyerist Podcast, a series of conversations about law practice. Each week, we talk with legal entrepreneurs and innovators about building a successful law practice in today's challenging and constantly changing legal market. And now, here are your hosts.
Hi, I'm Sam Glover.
And I'm Aaron Street, and this is episode 207 of the Lawyerist Podcast, part of the Legal Talk Network. Today we're talking with Natalie Worsfold about building litigation analytics software to help her firm and its clients make better decisions.
Today's podcast is brought to you by Podium, Gusto, and Casetext. We wouldn't be able to do this show without their support, so stay tuned. We'll tell you more about them later on. And now it's time for another installment of our occasional segment, Hey Aaron, what are you reading? So hey Aaron, what are you reading?
How occasional do we think this segment is going to be?
I mean, last time you were reading like 15 books, so I assume you've finished a few of them now. And I guess it'll be however long it takes you to finish this round of books and start some new ones.
Okay. So like monthly-ish?
Sure.
Okay. Cool. Sounds good. Sounds like a good plan. So since our last installment, I finished a bunch of the books I was reading, and I haven't finished a couple of the books I was reading, and so they will be unmentioned but are still being slowly read.
There you go.
I am currently reading two books other than the ones that I didn't finish that I mentioned last time. Neither of my current two books are at all useful for law practice or business or entrepreneurship or personal development. Some of the books I finished in between that I will mention are. But the two books I'm currently reading are The Food Explorer, which is about David Fairchild.
Because you're a total food nerd, yeah.
Who nearly single-handedly between the 1880s and 1920s brought to America and popularized the commercialization of almost all the foods we currently know, including just about every fruit that Americans eat. It's a fascinating book.
I bet.
And then even more fascinating is a book project thing, game mystery that I'm reading called S, which was created by J.J. Abrams, famously of Lost and Star Trek and whatever, and Star Wars. And S is a fiction book encased in another fiction book. So it is a pretend 1940s novel that then has people writing a story to each other in the margins of the book and includes a bunch of secret inserts in the book. And it's fascinating. It's one of the most creative book art projects celebrating books that I have ever encountered, and it's immersive and amazing.
That reminds me of Joshua Lennon at Clio. Once we were, having cocktails and chatting about books, and he's a big reader. And he was telling me he was into metafiction, which is like second person fiction. So like, they say it's you do this and you do that. And he recommended a book to me that wound up being about me, the reader, in a relationship with a woman. And the two of us are on a search to find a better translation of a work of fiction, which you then read and find out is wrong, and you read it again. You read the same book a couple times. It's really weird.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah.
I'm going to digress before telling you the four books that I have finished that are more relevant to our audience. My digression is, have you watched Bandersnatch yet?
No,
Netflix.
Is that one of the series, or is that the name?
It's a newly invented form of interactive movie.
Okay.
That is a choose-your-own-adventure about a guy making a video game of a choose-your-own-adventure based on a book about a choose-your-own-adventure, and it's the most amazing TV experience I've ever experienced.
Is it scary?
It is dark.
It sounds scary. Like, I hate scary stuff.
No, it's not scary. It's dark.
Okay.
And completely amazing and innovative, and it's incredible. I don't want to give too much away.
I'll check it out, because I don't really watch TV or movies because I get bored, but if it's interactive, it might hook me.
This is for sure one of the weirdest podcast intros we've ever done.
Yeah, well, let's keep it going then.
Okay, so four books I've finished since we last spoke. Gary Vaynerchuk's Crushing It, which is his follow-on, I think 10 years later, to his original book, Crush It. And it's mostly based around kind of both case studies of people who implemented his ideas.
It's difficult to talk about those two books as separate books.
Of Crush It and Crushing It?
Yes.
Yeah. They have different color covers, if that's useful. So Crush It was about kind of how to become social media entrepreneur and build a personal brand on social media. Crushing It is a mix of case studies by people who did that back then and where they are now, and a bunch of tips and advice and tactics for how to implement personal branding and entrepreneurship on current social media tools. So it's got kind of pro tips for Facebook and Instagram and Snapchat and YouTube and those kinds of things. It's interesting. I would honestly say that if you are interested in Gary Vaynerchuk, that just listening to his podcast, since it's free, is probably just as good, but it's an okay book. Second is the book Ideal Team Player by Pat Lencioni, which is written in the form of a business book parable. And it's about how to make sure that you both hire and manage people on your team for a set of traits that would make them really good as team players. And there's a whole tool set.
That seems quite useful.
Yeah, it's a good book if you can handle the business parable, which is a book format that sometimes I gristle at a little bit.
I hate the book parable format, actually, but that doesn't mean
this
there's
one
not
is
good
not
stuff
as
there.
hokey as they often are. He is a better writer than some of the business book parable writers have been in the past. Third is I'll Be Gone in the Dark, which was written by Michelle McNamara about her personal quest to investigate the Golden State Killer in California. She was the wife of Patton Oswalt, the comedian. She died while writing the book, and the book was then kind of assembled after she died and led to the capture of the Golden State Killer, who had been a serial killer for 40 years, and it's fascinating.
Cool.
And then fourth is the book Bad Blood, which is the expose about the Silicon Valley startup Theranos and all of the
I was
terrible,
really expecting it to have something to do with Taylor Swift.
No. I mean, maybe. No, so like Theranos was just like the epitome of secret, shady, sketchy startup and just amazing fraud and things. And the book is pretty incredible about how not to run a business.
I'm slogging through Madame Bovary, which my wife laughed at me when I pronounced it that way because obviously it's French. It would be Madame Bovary.
Yeah, that doesn't sound right, though.
But as I'm reading it, I'm reflecting on a Twitter trending topic the other day where it was sort of a post your unpopular opinions about books. And a couple people posted something in the nature of most of the classics are about white people living lives I can't identify with and they're boring. And although for a classic, Madame Bovary is actually quite salacious and fun to read, that's on a scale. Mm-hmm. It's not nearly as fun as the latest cyberpunk thriller. So I'm not really sure. I don't have conclusions about that, but I think that's kind of interesting, especially as a classics person. But
there is definitely a question as to whether the canon of classics needs some updates.
Yeah. But when I'm done with that, then I'll dig into the next business book. And the next one I'm going to read is about behavior change.
Cool.
So that'll be interesting.
So that's our very long-winded segment on
that has been our occasional segment. Hey, Aaron, what are you reading?
What a joy that was.
I hope you like it. If you have book suggestions or you want to share what you're reading with us, probably the best place to do that is in our Facebook group, where we would welcome you chiming in and saying, hey, I just read this book. Here are the ideas I got from it. Is anybody else reading it, etc.? Or, hey, you guys should read this. I'd be curious to know what you think, whatever. We'd love to hear from you in that Facebook group. And the way to join that is if you're an insider and you're a solo or small firm lawyer in the US and Canada, you are eligible. So just let us know. You can go to Facebook and find the Lawyerist Insiders group and apply there. Or if you aren't yet an insider, you need to join on the front page of Lawyerist. So now we've got a brief sponsored conversation with Joseph Jenkins from Podium, and then we'll have my conversation with Natalie Worsfold.
Hi, I'm Joseph Jenkins with Podium. I'm Director of Sales, and Podium is an interaction platform for legal firms across the U.S. and Australia. We help with online reviews, texting with customers, and ensuring that your reviews are managed in a practical way through our texting platform.
Joseph, thanks for being with us today. So, speaking of reviews, I know that review sites are both beneficial and scary to lawyers, especially when the prospect of getting negative reviews comes up. So you've got some tips for us today on how lawyers can respond to negative reviews. What do you got?
Certainly. We have a couple different steps here that I think everyone will find valuable. Most simply, you want to make sure that you take emotion out of reviews. They can have a sting to them, especially when you know you've taken care of a client, gone above and beyond for them. The whole staff's done everything to make everything go as well as it could, and then a ruling isn't favorable. So a couple things very simply. You want to first apologize and be empathetic to the client, whether or not you were at fault. You don't want to admit fault, of course, but you want to be empathetic to their situation. We're sorry you had a bad experience is a good example of that phrasing. You want to stay calm as well. So again, ensure that you take the emotion out of it. Don't get defensive. It's not the place for defending yourself in front of the internet. You'll never win on the internet in an argument. So certainly you want to, stay calm, be empathetic, and ensure that the client knows that you care. Keep in mind, this is more of a PR play for your firm.
Yeah, the audience is not the specific customer. The audience is everyone else who encounters this review.
Precisely. Now, the specific customer will get a notification of your response through Google via email. Okay. But the customer, again, is those reading the reviews. So we want to make sure that they're aware of your tone, of your professionalism, the way you handle clients that are having a negative experience. So stay calm. It's often helpful to have someone who's not involved with their case respond. So perhaps a paralegal, an office manager to do the response. That helps separate the individual from the problem, and it helps them often provide a more unemotional response for the client.
Yeah, you're trying to appear calm, cool, and collected and earnest in wanting to be helpful, right?
Precisely. Yes. Again, envision if you were a client looking at your firm, a prospective client looking at your firm, and you read the review, how much more favorable would you be to work with your own firm? And if you can answer that question with confidence, you've done a good job. Very simple. Now, again, in addition to being empathetic and not being emotional, you certainly want to offer a solution. Now, you can't offer, a reimbursement or, other types of solutions over the internet necessarily. But the best thing to do is to say, we'd love to talk to you directly. Please give us a call right at our office. Take the conversation offline. Make sure that you're honoring attorney-client privilege and taking the conversation offline where you can talk to them directly and privately about their case.
In case they need to yell at you some more.
That does happen on occasion. Yes. But again, if I'm a prospective customer looking at the review, I'm much more inclined to work with you because you go out of your way to help clients, even if they don't have the best experience.
Well, and also I suppose it's easy to rant at the internet. It's a little bit harder to rant when you're on the phone with somebody. There, I think our tendency is to try and find some common ground and resolve a thing.
Precisely. Yeah. And if you think about, again, the consumer's eyes, that's where we want to think through all of these conversations. They want to have resolution. They want to feel like you're taking care of everyone. No business is perfect, and certainly you find a way to take care of them as best you can. And then lastly, if I may, confidence increases with reviews that are negative, Sam, believe it or not. And the reason for that is if I see nothing but 5-star reviews, I'm skeptical that you went to your association or to your college buddies or your family or to your employees to leave good reviews, right? So having a large quantity of good reviews with a balance of some that are negative can actually help validate your reputation with a good response to the negative review.
I suppose what you're trying to do when you get a really negative review, as opposed to like a 3-star review, just increases people's confidence in you because it's somebody giving constructive feedback. Like a really negative review, I think one of the things you're trying to do is show that you are reasonable, that you want to be helpful, and you kind of want to contrast that with the person who left the review, which is, they're just complaining and being loud about it.
Exactly. Yeah, well said. Something else worth mentioning is when you think about, again, the research process of who I'm going to work with, there's a lot of emotion involved there, right? And we can read through that emotion very quickly. We sense that people are complaining. It's often inflated or exaggerated online, right? And so as long as you seem like the rational, unemotional, but empathetic responder, that goes a long way for winning the client over to work with your firm.
Very cool. Listeners, if you'd like to learn more about Podium and how it can help you get more reviews on the site that matter to you, go to podium.com/lawyerist. That's podium.com/lawyerist, and we'll include that link in our show notes. Joseph, thanks so much.
Thank you.
My name is Natalie Worsfold. I am part of Counter Tax Lawyers, where I lead Counter's process innovation, and I'm the co-creator of Countermeasure, which is a litigation analysis tool that helps lawyers win cases.
Welcome back to the podcast. And I have to say, it is so fun to have you on the other side of my headphones when I'm not just listening to you talk and Peter talk on your podcast. It's so weird to have another podcast host on my podcast.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's awesome to have you back. I mean, last time, I think Countermeasure had a name and you were working on it then, but we didn't really go into depth about it. So I'm excited to talk about it today. But first, maybe back up and tell us about CounterTax. What is the approach to law practice that eventually resulted in you building software, which isn't a thing firms normally do? So maybe how do you talk about CounterTax as a firm?
So Countertax is a tax litigation boutique. We're based in Canada. We help individuals and businesses find the best way to fight the government and fight tax assessments. And I think what you're driving at in terms of, how did we get here? We've always been, I guess, driven and pushed towards this idea of setting the new law firm standard. Like, what's the type of law firm that we would want to hire if we had a tax problem? And I think that drive has always kept us sort of moving forward, finding new ways to improve our processes, improve, I guess, the results we get for our clients.
This is a little bit of a tangent, but I think it's an interesting one. One of the things I've noticed in talking with you, at conferences and listening to your podcast is, which, by the way, just pause here, but if people aren't listening to the Building New Law podcast, I don't know what you're even doing with your life. Go listen to it. That's their podcast. It's awesome. You should listen to it. It's the second best legal podcast, law practice podcast out there.
Well, thank you.
I listen to it all the time. But here's what I was going to say is, so I get the impression that you're a fairly small firm by the standards that we use to judge firms, we being lawyerists, I think, and in maybe the American Bar Association standards. But in listening to it, it sounds like you kind of think of yourselves more as playing in what I would think of as like a big law playing field. Is there something about the Canadian market that makes something different there? I'm not sure.
I don't know if I would say it's the Canadian market. We're 13 people. Like, we're not large, by any standards, whether that's American, Canadian, or anything. But I think what it is more about mindset. So, we're not building a firm for today. We're building a firm for 15 years down the road kind of thing. So everything we do is about how can we be better tomorrow than we were today. So I think it's having that mindset and that focus means that you're not caught up in things like size. Like, there is nothing that we can't do if we put our mind to it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I guess I want to pick that apart a little bit more and understand it better, because one of the things I've noticed the more deeply I am involved in the world of law practice, though, is how different big firms and small firms are in a business sense. But you seem to find a lot of useful thinking and value in what big firm, business people are thinking about. And so I'm curious, like, what are some of the takeaways there, and how do you think about running your small firm in the same way the big firms do?
I don't know if I sit there and think about a big firm versus a small firm or any of that kind of thing. Like, I've always been in a smaller firm, and I've always, the day I became a lawyer, I quit my job and started my own practice. Like, it's always been very natural to me to, I guess, not be scared of the business side of things. I think what we focus on here and what we're thinking about is, how do I be a better lawyer? How do I solve a problem? And I think so much of that comes back to process and, I guess, quality, that from that perspective, it doesn't matter whether you're big or small, you need to embrace the business side of it just to be able to deliver on your legal work.
I think that sounds like a good point. I have sometimes said that I thought maybe the Canadian legal market meant that small firms were able to compete with bigger firms for the business, but it sounds like I'm just off on that.
I think anyone can compete anywhere. It's just a question of jumping on it, believing you can do it, and having a go.
That's awesome. And I appreciate that, because that was sort of a curiosity that I've had that I haven't really brought up with you before. So so that helps. Okay, so let's talk about Countermeasure, though. We are starting from now. It's out there. It has its own website, which we'll link to. People can read about this piece of software. Let's back up to the beginning. And like, before Countermeasure had a name or an idea, what was the problem you were trying to solve?
So we are litigators through and through. That's all we do here. And I think the fundamental problem we were trying to solve is, like, how can I be a better litigator? How can I deliver my legal work and show everybody that my legal work is better than everybody else's? So that quality key, and trying to figure out, how can I analyze this case deeper? How can I make sure that I've covered all my bases? Like, those were the key problems we were trying to solve here. A lot of it stemmed from, like, you used to be a litigator, right?
Mm-hmm,
so the questions that clients ask, you always hear, like, what does it look like if I win? What are my chances of winning? And things like that. So what we were trying to do is find a way to solve the problem of, I guess, finding answers to those questions, making sure that we are putting a client in the optimal position, and even communicating a little better with clients.
I feel like in some ways the question I'm about to ask comes sort of out of one of your other recent podcasts, which is litigators often say, we give estimates of, I think you've got a 70% chance of success on this motion, or, I think you've got a 50% chance of recovering this much money. And I think what I remember hearing in that podcast is you were trying to come up with a systematic approach to doing that so that you're just not pulling numbers out of your ass. And and instead you can point to it and say, no, here is the analysis that we went through to arrive at this number. Yep. And here's our level of confidence in it.
Yeah, it was basically to try and make those numbers more accurate and to try and have that clearer communication. We were looking for a way to, like you said, systematize breaking down a case into each of the smaller components and then analyzing, what do we need to prove for each of these components? How are we going to do that? Is the evidence strong? Is the evidence weak? And then bringing all of that analysis together to be able to give the 70% number or whatever the number is. And then essentially, you want to be able to drill down and explain why, right?
So, what's wrong with just giving a back of the napkin or a gut feeling percentage when you talk to a client?
I would say it's better than nothing.
When I say that, it seems like the answer is obvious, but I don't think it is.
Well, a lot of litigators are scared of giving numbers, so they won't give anything at all, and that's just dangerous. But I think back of the napkin, like I said, better than nothing. But lawyers are highly skilled, highly trained problem solvers, and all of us, if we were on the receiving end, would want something more substantial, right? I don't want a back of the napkin analysis. I'm not paying for a back of the napkin analysis, and I think clients deserve better than that.
Well, and I suppose it allows businesses aren't in the business of winning cases. They're in the business of trying to figure out what their costs are going to be and then making an analysis of the risk and then deciding what to do. And if you've just pulled a number out of your ass, then they don't really have any confidence in it. Whereas if you can say, here's the analysis we went through to give you this number, then you've given your client, if they're a business, something that they can actually hang their hat on and say, okay, we're going to make some business decisions based on this. Not, I don't know, my lawyer said a number, but he doesn't sound very confident in it.
Yeah, you're trying to put your client into the best possible position.
So I assume you started out making gut estimates.
Yeah, absolutely. We actually, everybody here likes to bet on things. So we use that as a way to get better at predictions.
I like that.
So we had a lot of games where we'll place bets and try and predict anything that we possibly can. So that was a really good way to kind of get better at it. The other side to that was breaking down cases into smaller chunks. It's very hard to say you got a 70% chance of winning this whole case. But if you break it right down to very, very small steps, it becomes much easier. You can, draw on your previous experience. Hopefully, if you bring more people in, you can get some collective experience together and you can use that to sort of fine tune how you predict things.
And knowing a bit about you and your approach, you didn't just throw the number out there. You actually, after the thing happened, you went back and said, well, how do we think we did? Did we make that decision well?
Yeah, it's really hard, obviously, especially with probabilities and things like that. At the end of the day, it's very hard to know whether your predictions were accurate. And we've spent a lot of time trying to sort of track that and look into, how do we make this better? How do we make sure that we're improving and things like that? But I think sitting down after a piece of litigation has finished and going through, what could we have done better and things like that, all of those processes really help to improve what you're doing in the future.
Well, and when you're trying to evaluate, did we give a good estimate? I'm thinking of my podcast with Annie Duke, who wrote the book Thinking in Bets, and she said, look,
I loved that one.
Yeah, it's not, if you gave yourself a 90% chance of winning and you lost, it doesn't mean that you gave yourself the wrong percentage. Yep. It means that you had a 1 in 10 chance of losing and you lost. What you need to ask is, did we evaluate that? Did we analyze it? Did we estimate it correctly?
Yeah, and I went. I do a lot of stuff to do with decision quality and decision analysis, and I think there's a whole world of wonderful research and wonderful papers that have gone into how can we make the best possible decisions. And the more you sort of pull on that thread, I think there's so much to learn as lawyers that I certainly don't think we're exposed to in law school or anything like that.
So how did this evolve past doing office games and keeping track of your estimates and stuff? How did this evolve into something more systematic where you actually were taking variables into account and trying to do it more systematically?
So like most things, we started off in spreadsheets. I'm a huge lover of Excel. I spend a lot of time there. And, we started trying to do this in spreadsheets. We looked for, we assumed somebody had built something like this because, it sounds like it's hugely valuable. So why hasn't it already been been built.
Yeah.
So we spent a lot of time we started off looking in law, couldn't find anything, and then basically went broader and started looking at other risk and decision analysis software and things like that. So those were definitely the first solutions that we went through and played with. The biggest problem for us is we needed to customize all of the tax calculations in there.
Right.
So we were kind of living in two worlds all the time, where it was like we'd have the spreadsheet for the tax calculations, and then we'd be using other software to try and get through to what we were doing. But our whole firm is on the cloud, and none of the solutions we could find for risk and decision analysis were cloud-based. So it became discovery of this gap in the market where I couldn't find a solution that somebody has made, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense, because I assume what you need is you need to be able to have a long list of potential variables. Mm-hmm. And then you need to plug all of those into an equation that takes the likelihood of various variables being what they are into account, and then spits out a number at the end, or a range, or...
Yep.
So, I mean, give me a picture of like what the wireframe for this thing is.
The best thing to picture is a decision tree. So a lot of the analysis that we're doing, because it's not completely automated, like we're not trying to replace lawyers or anything like that. This is...
I'm sorry, if there aren't robots involved, this podcast is over.
No, we're not trying to replace anyone. It's very much like, why would you replace them, right? Like the lawyer's got the knowledge, they've got the legal expertise, and instead of trying to replicate that in a machine, it makes much more sense to augment the person with the expertise. And, we can automate things like the math, because let's face it, none of us really want to do math, but it's really about taking the expertise that's in the lawyer and being able to process that quicker. And the reason we favor decision trees is simply because you can visually see all of the paths in front of you. And I think that really helps lawyers, other legal professionals to just go through and say, okay, what if we do this? What happens next? And it always reminds me of one of those choose your own adventure books, where it's like you can go through and you can see what's going to happen. And I think that is the best thing to picture when you're looking at how to analyze a case.
So if I'm a user sitting down at my computer with a case file and I'm trying to evaluate, what would I be trying to evaluate, first of all? The likelihood of success on a motion, or what?
You can do anything.
Okay.
So basically the way I look at it is you're trying to help the client decide whether the entire piece of litigation is valuable, like, so what's their return on investment going to be if they go ahead, or on the flip side, what is their exposure, what's their risk, and things like that.
So the first time you do this would probably be to do something like that, like on the overall case that you've brought to me, here's what I think your likelihood of success is, here's what I think your risk is.
Yep.
And that would be the initial thing that you do.
Yeah, we're trying to basically answer really simple questions like, what am I fighting about? Like, what's the amount at stake? What, if you broke that down, like by category, for example, a lot of people want to see it by legal issue and things like that. And then we move into chances of success. What's a reasonable settlement range here based on what we know about the costs involved, what we know about the chances of success? Where should you be trying to end up, essentially?
So success is not a matter of winning necessarily. It's a matter of resolving the case within your client's goals.
You got it. And I think one of the most important things that we found when we first started using this software is you're having better conversations with your clients about what does it mean to win? Like, what does a win look like? So putting dollars and cents to that, or, if you're not dealing with money, you can try and quantify something else. But once you can narrow it down, I think everybody's on the same page in terms of, what is a win and how can we get there as quickly and as cheaply as possible?
That makes a ton of sense to me. That really resonates with me because like when I was a litigator, I sued debt collectors, and there was sort of an equation for how the money would be distributed when we won or lost or settled or whatever. And it was a very clear thing. I could walk through it with clients. It was simple enough for them to get their heads around. They could see the numbers going in. They could see them coming out. It was predictable. It was a very different type of thing than what you're doing, but it allowed us to have a conversation around money that wasn't just about your pile seems like it's too big. Or like, why are they getting so much? You could actually just break it down. And I think it helps. And it takes that you're making too much money or I'm paying you too much out of the equation when you're actually just, nope, here's the formula and we're going to work on it together.
Yeah. And obviously you've got to have the conversation to set the formula and things like that.
Totally.
But I think it's basically trying to give some structure to how lawyers analyze a case and just trying to help, I guess, put that structure there and give somebody a platform to essentially break apart their case and uncover what strategy is going to be best. Like, I know within, I would say about 2 weeks of using it in our law firm here, we were finding things that we just hadn't really thought of. And until you see all the different paths in that decision tree, you don't realize that, perhaps if I argued this issue and let this other one go, we'd actually get more money. So,
because you can start checking boxes and changing things and seeing how it works.
Yeah, and it's so unexpected because sometimes I find litigators tend to get, caught up in what might be the more interesting legal issue, for example, and, spend more resources preparing arguments based on something that is interesting from a legal perspective. Mm-hmm. Whereas when you run the numbers, that might not be the most influential or important factor in a case. So, having a mechanism and a platform to look at the numbers helps to really kind of check any, I won't say bias, but any favoritism that might be going on in terms of how are you spending your client's money, and are you making sure that they get the best possible result out of this?
I have a lot more questions because I'm fascinated by this. We need to take a quick break to hear from our sponsors, and we'll come back in just a minute to continue.
Legal research is too expensive, hard to use, and time-consuming. It doesn't have to be. With Casetext, you can save $2,000 and 210 hours on legal research this year. Casetext has unique artificial intelligence technology that does a lot of the research for you. Just drag and drop a complaint or brief, and you'll quickly find cases on the same facts, legal issues, and jurisdiction. Casetext is fast, well-designed, and comprehensive, and it's very affordable. Go to casetext.com/lawyerist to get Casetext for $55 a month. Casetext is modern legal research trusted by over 3,000 small firms and 40 firms in the AmLaw 200. Go to casetext.com/lawyerist to get started.
If you have a small business or know someone who does, you probably know that small business owners wear a lot of hats, and some of those hats are totally great. But some, like filing taxes and running payroll, for example, are not so great. That's where Gusto comes in. Gusto makes payroll, taxes, and HR easy for small businesses. Fast, simple payroll processing, benefits, and expert HR support all in one place. Gusto automatically pays and files your federal, state, and local taxes so you don't have to worry about it. Plus, they make it easy to add on health benefits and even 401ks for your team. Those old school, clunky payroll providers just weren't built for the way modern small businesses work, but Gusto is, so let them wear one of your many hats. You have better things to do. Listeners get 3 months free when they run their first payroll. Try a demo and see for yourself at gusto.com/lawyerist. That's gusto.com/lawyerist. In business, reputation is everything. And while online reviews can make or break you, your best clients probably aren't showing up. And that's too bad, because if they did, you'd have more clients, more referrals, and be the top-rated law firm in your area. If you're tired of waiting for reviews to trickle in, you have a choice. Either keep waiting or get proactive with Podium. Podium helps you get more reviews on the sites that matter most. Use their messaging platform to give friendly reminders while sending clients straight to the review sites that you care about the most. With Podium's built-in analytics, you can set goals, monitor progress, and incentivize your team to reach out to more clients. Become the #1 choice online. Visit podium.com/lawyerist to save 10% when you start. That's podium.com/lawyerist to get started and save 10%.
Okay, we're back. So Natalie, I have a basket of questions here for you. But what I'm most curious about is I do software, I code. I love talking about the internals of how things work, but I'm also a user. And one of the things that I really want to get my head around here is, what is it like to use Countermeasure? Do I sit down with this with my client and with a pile of documents, or, just with some numbers in mind? Do I see a decision tree laid out before me on my screen so that I can play with all the different variables? Like, what is it like to use Countermeasure?
So it's an online piece of software. It's cloud-based. So it's flexible in the sense, like, yes, you could sit down with your client. What we have found, so basically we've been using this in our law firm for a year now. And so our legal department has, tried every single way to use this to figure out what works best and everything else. So we're very, very lucky that we have a bunch of lawyers here who are wonderful beta testers, and they're going through logging bugs, giving me beautiful feature requests, and making the software stronger every day. But what we found is it tends to be, the first step seems to be you take what the client has given you, and then you essentially break that down and enter that that information into countermeasure by yourself. So that typically isn't something that will be done with the client there. You could absolutely do it together. But it seems to be, whenever you first get a case, you want to spend a little bit of time just, ripping it apart essentially and figuring out some of the basic, what issues am I dealing with and things like that. So,
and this entry is in the nature of a form, I assume.
Yeah, very similar. So we built out the tax module first, which is what our legal team is using here. So a lot of data entry comes first because we've got to get all the numbers from the tax assessments in and things like that. So there's always going to be some aspect of slightly more boring data entry in terms of numbers.
And is there stuff like the judge assigned to your case, or is that not an issue?
We haven't put that feature in yet. It actually came up as a feature request recently, and it's something that we've absolutely looked at. I think mostly for tracking purposes. Like you want to be able to make sure that you have all of this data in a structured format that you could go back and learn from later.
Yeah. Because at some point you will have enough data that you could actually feed that back in and then tweak the results based on it, I assume.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I love about Countermeasure is a great way to structure your data. Like you hear all this talk now about how data's the new oil and all of that kind of thing. And
yeah, but it isn't if you can't do anything with it.
Exactly. If it's unstructured and you can't do anything with it, you might as well just have water. So what we have found and what I guess the hidden gift is with Countermeasure is the more you use it, the more you structure your data set. And so like you said, at the end of that, you can then have a feedback loop built in.
So I've sat down, I've entered all of this data on my screen, and what comes next for how I'm using it?
You've entered the data and you've broken down the legal issues. So breaking down the legal issues is where, the lawyer's expertise comes in. And that's where...
Is this like checking the box next to all the issues in play, or?
Yes, it is. But I would say they're customizable. So, not every issue is going to be something that you've dealt with before or something that's programmed into the system. So there's always the flexibility if you need to add something and look at that. So we use something called relevance diagrams in the software. And basically what that is doing is getting you to look at common legal tests. So we have pre-entered legal tests that people can look up that basically says to you, okay, these are the things that you're going to need to prove for this issue. And so it's sort of setting out a roadmap as to what, for this particular case, what are you going to have to go and do?
And then do I assign strong or weak to each of those elements, or do I percentage? How do I take that into account?
So, yep, you would go through and you would start looking at percentages. So for the, much smaller issues that we've broken down, so it could be something as simple as proving the residency of a client or something. So one of the tests involved is, where's their main location? So where is the corporate head office or something like that? So if you need to prove it's in the States, for example, and that it's in the States, you have incorporation documents in the States, you're really confident on that fact. So you can mark that one as 100%. If you didn't have the documents, but you knew you could have somebody reliable testify for it, you might put it in at, say, 80% or something like that. So it's basically taking your judgment based on your knowledge and expertise and your review of the available evidence and saying, I'm 80% sure I can establish this fact. And then what the software does is take all of those smaller broken down facts and then bring them together in the decision tree so that you can then see, okay, if you weren't able to establish this fact, what does that then do in terms of the path moving forward?
So why doesn't that just move the unreliability of you have an 80% chance of winning just further down the how does this account for the inherent squishiness of those numbers?
I don't think anything can ever account for the inherent squishiness of numbers. It's always going to be there. What we've looked at and what we found is it's fluid. Things change. You get a new piece of evidence in, it might change some of your percentages. So this isn't a static thing that you can just do and walk away. It's a living, breathing, real life example of what happens as you go through a case.
So is this the kind of thing where I can zoom out on my screen and and see where all these variables are, and so I can start tweaking and pulling levers and turning switches on and off and changing numbers and start to see here's where the nexus of the issue is that we're going to have to deal with in order to resolve this case within my client's goals.
Yeah, and the idea is what we're trying to do is help lawyers find that linchpin issue. Every case has one, right? And we're trying to find a faster way for a lawyer to identify what are the key facts that I need to focus on that will provide the greatest chance of success in this case. So So we're looking at sensitivity analysis and things like that to try and make sure we identify what are the key issues as quickly and, as early as possible. Because if you have a terrible chance on a key issue, you need to know that at the beginning, not a week before trial.
Now, you said that this becomes a really important tool for talking about risk and money and things with your client. At what point and how do you bring the client in to see what you're doing, or what do you show them? What piece of this do you show them to be that discussion point?
So we've done it a couple of different ways. We have some clients who want to be involved and go through the entire decision tree. So we will take them from, like you said, the zoomed out picture. And then if they have questions, we zoom into wherever it is that they want to ask some more questions about. And one of the nice things about this being an online program is essentially you can have those conversations whilst not being in the same room if you need to, right? Mm-hmm. So, you can
share a login with them or something.
You can share a login. You can be on the phone at the same time. Like, everything is about collaboration. Like, we're trying to make litigation a team sport. It's it's not just you and your client. You probably want your client's accountant in there or something, right? Like, CFOs are so valuable and they have such good insight into other businesses that I think, including as many perspectives as you can is the only way that you're going to make sure that the analysis covers everything. So that's one way to do it. We have a lot of clients who really love that. And it's been really great at uncovering things that we just hadn't seen. Like, the client will pick up on something and say, oh, actually, this reminds me of, we had a file where the client was dealing with a completely separate legal issue that everybody thought was totally unrelated. And we were going through a decision tree and countermeasure with the client and his CFO. And it turns out that there was one factor that linked between the two cases. And if we solved the tax problem, we actually solved the other piece of litigation. So, we got the other lawyers on the phone, they got involved, and we were looking at this decision tree, and it completely changed how we tried to solve this case, because now we knew we couldn't settle where we gave up on that particular issue. So it completely sort of changed how we allocated resources and things like that. So definitely the collaboration side and making it a team sport, like, that can go all the way through the decision tree side of it. If you have a client who doesn't want necessarily to be as involved, we generate reports. So I can give you a link to some of the reports so that you can see them. But basically,
if you do, we'll include that in the show notes. That'd be fun to show.
Yeah, it's just basically they're just sample reports, but it's trying to communicate, here are the different outcomes that we're looking at in terms of what's possible. Here's the range we think you should settle in. And just having that sort of condensed version can sometimes be a little bit less overwhelming. Like, the decision tree can be a little much for some people. So the client can kind of choose what level of, reporting they want to see.
I mean, I realize that this is on your website and stuff, but like, your clients don't ever hire a traditional law firm after working with you, do they? I mean, it's like you guys are bringing cannons and airplanes to a knife fight.
Yep. And a part of the reason we're able to do that is because when you use software, you can make something easy and you can make it quick and cheap. Like, we have to be careful.
But also intelligent. Like, yep. How come nobody else, they just threw a number at me, or they said it was risky. Like, how come nobody else has ever done this? Because they can't. This is our software. We built it and nobody else gets to do it.
Yeah, it's really tough if you don't have software. Like, we've done this for years without anything to support us as a tool. And it's time consuming and it's expensive and it's really, really labor intensive. And once you can take some of the pressure off and give the lawyers the tools to make that happen quicker, then you're in a position where you can provide this high level of analysis without it being out of reach.
Are other firms doing anything like this that you're aware of?
I keep trying to find them.
Because it'd be easier if they were.
I think it's such a valuable piece of insight, and I think it's such a better way to give advice to people that I hope there are, people listening. If anybody is listening and they do this, I would love to chat. Like, I think it is such an important way to communicate with clients that I honestly hope people are doing it.
So from the website, countermeasure.legal, it looks to me like you are offering this for sale now.
Yeah. So we developed the tax module, as I mentioned, and we've had all of our wonderful people here as our beta testers in improving it. And we are launching a commercial product later in the year. I don't have an official launch date, but it will be in 2019.
What does that look like for the firm? Is this a separate entity now that you're going to be using to sell the software, or does it live within the firm? And is it going to feel like starting a new business, or is it already a separate business? I'm just curious how CounterTax thinks about Countermeasure as a separate thing.
Well, we're basically, I guess we're a tech company incubating within a law firm. So yeah, it's a fun way to look at it. The only sort of
probably the only one.
Well, there's Atrium. Atrium is doing something similar.
Fair
They
enough.
have the tech company and they have the law firm. So it's kind of similar to that setup. And I guess, like I said, Countertax is essentially Countermeasure's first client, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. So Countermeasure is a separate entity now.
Right. Yeah. It operates, it's still within the law firm, but it operates, like I said, like a tech company incubating inside of a law firm.
What do you foresee that looks like? We often see lawyers who pick up a side gig, a side hustle or something like that. And how do you balance the potential distraction against the potential upside? How do you think about that?
So yes, we've been pretty lucky in the sense, like, this is what I do here full time now.
Yeah.
So, I've mostly stepped aside from my legal work. I have a few files that I'm wrapping up, but essentially I am, focused on this, and it's been wonderful. Like, it's been so nice to jump in, solve this problem, and work on, how can I make litigation analysis better, not just in Counter, but, for the whole industry. And I think once you have the freedom to step away from, I don't have the, I guess, financial pressure of somebody in perhaps a smaller firm where you need to be working part-time to fund your side hustle. Once you have the freedom to just jump in with 2 feet, I think everything just kind of flows from that.
How do you think about splitting this off so that Countermeasure can be used by someone other than Countertax? I'm an F1 fan, and it feels a little bit to me like Ferrari offering engines to Red Bull, right? Like Red Bull never gets the best engine or the newest updates, and Ferrari is always going to build their engine for their car first, and Red Bull is going to have to develop their car around Ferrari's engine. Is that what it's going to feel like to be a customer of Countermeasure?
I don't think so. I mean, so Counter just does tax, right?
Yep.
Like we don't do anything else. So I feel like the idea of trying to keep the best just for us seems very, without the pun intended, counterintuitive. Like I'm not here to just keep the best for Counter. I'm here to make this better for clients. And, if you just keep all your secrets to yourself.
Clients soon to include other firms that are using it, really.
It just includes anybody with a tax problem, anybody with a legal problem, right? Our mission here is to make litigation analysis better. And that isn't specific to Counter. Like, I am trying to find a way to make the whole legal profession do any kind of case analysis to a deeper, better level with a higher quality recommendation to their client. So this isn't about, making the wonderful Ferrari engine and keeping it for yourself. I am more than confident that we can share this tool with everybody, and, our firm will be just fine. Like, we have so many other aspects that if somebody else uses the software, they're not necessarily gaining a competitive advantage over us or anything like that. This is, one of our many tools here.
I assume since Countermeasure is your baby, the thought has at least crossed your mind that Countermeasure could become bigger than Countertax.
Yeah, absolutely.
What would that look like? That sounds like it'd be super weird.
A really big party. Yeah. I don't know what it would look like in the specifics. I assume it would look like any other piece of legal tech that's done really well.
Yeah.
Like hopefully I'm having Countermeasure, like CleoCon festivals in a few years. It's
CounterCon. Yeah.
You got it. Yeah. It's one of those things where, I've never been afraid to give something a try. And I think, the more you just jump in and see what happens, the better it'll be.
So you have a software development team now, right? This is in-house.
Yeah, we have in-house and we have some external people as well who give us a hand.
So you're managing some contractors from outside somewhere?
Yeah, a little bit of everything.
Cool. I mean, when you started building this as software and moving it off of spreadsheets and trying to build it into a working thing that the firm could use, how do you even get started with that? How do you start thinking about it?
In terms of, I guess we didn't think about it as much as we probably should have. We just started trying. So
it was we need this, and so we're going to do it.
Exactly. Yeah. And once it reached the point where we could see the value, and we could see even with the Excel spreadsheets, like, we were able to do things so much quicker and better that there was no doubt that this was a valuable investment for the firm.
Was the team all there at the outset, or was it, you and maybe a coder and things slowly building from there? Or how did the team get to?
Slowly building.
There are there are like 6 or 7 faces on the page here. So
yeah, slowly building. I feel like these things always start out small. A lot of the heavy lifting was actually on the legal design. Mm-hmm. So trying to figure out, how do I systematize the process of analyzing a case? Because before you throw technology in and try and automate it and code it, you better know what the process is that you're going to go through. So there was a lot of heavy lifting on that side just to make sure that we understood the case analysis process and how people, like I said, how people go through and think about a file. Like, our greatest strength as lawyers is how we think. And, once I started peeling away some layers, it was kind of shocking to see that case analysis is pretty unstructured, and no two lawyers seem to do it the same way. It's not really a course that's taught in law school. And so we spend a lot of time talking to people, talking to other lawyers, figuring out, okay, the best litigators in the country, how do they do this? What are their tricks? And basically taking all of that research and information, and then that's what we then embedded into Countermeasure.
So you've built a successful software product, successful in the sense that it does what CounterTax needs it to do and enables CounterTax to serve its clients better.
Yep.
It isn't successful in the marketplace yet because it's not even available. But
Yep.
but so sitting where you are now, which is sort of at the end of you've built what the law firm needs, how would you talk to another firm similarly thinking like, nothing out there really does what I want? Is it worth my while to build something?
I would say making sure you're very clear in terms of that process. Make sure you know what it is you want to build before you even start trying to build things. Because a lot of the setbacks we had originally was, we would develop a product, we'd do it one way, and then we go, oh, but this way is better, and we'd switch around a lot. But in the meantime, we've spent a lot of work on development and or a lot of time and money on development. So I would certainly say figure something out and test it before you actually start really building something a little more enterprise level, I would have said. So, when you say we've got a successful product, I will say like strongly, we are iterating and we are trying to make this better every day. Like, I don't picture this as having an end where you say, okay, it's done now. Like, every single day we find something new that we could add, or we uncover something that we want to tweak or change in some way.
I mean, I think that's that's not a throwaway point. I really want to emphasize, like, there is no such thing as you just go out and get a product and you're done. Like, you don't hire somebody to build the software that you want for your practice, and then it's a one-time expense, and 6 months later you get it and you're done. It is a living, breathing, ongoing thing. And so I guess what I'm taking away from that is partly is like, do you want to be in the software development business? Because even if you only have one client, which is yourself, like once you start down that road, that's what you're going to have to be.
I found so for me, it's very much like a process improvement business, if that makes sense.
Sure,
so, I'm not getting the lawyers here when they use the software, they aren't saying, oh, you should change this piece of code or anything like that. Like, they are not in the software development business. They are there to be better lawyers and to tweak things just from a process standpoint that they want to change. So definitely I would look at it in terms of, if you want to build a solution to use in-house or something like that, you need to be extremely comfortable with process mapping and continuous improvement.
I suppose you said process improvement in the sense of building the software, but in a way, like not even in a way, it is the way that Countermeasure is one of the improvements that CounterTax has done to the way that it assesses risk and outcomes and things like that. Like you didn't have to build software. There were other ways you could solve that problem. This just turned out to be one of the best ones for you.
Yeah, the reason it turned out to be software was just to speed up the calculations, to be honest. Like, what the real value that I think Counter got was going through the mapping out the process of how to analyze a case. And, you can do that with pen, paper, sticky notes and everything else. Like, it is not, you don't need a tech solution unless you are solving a problem that you also, there's aspects where you need to automate it. Like I said, the time we were spending before we could automate it, like we've dropped that by over a third. Like, it's night and day between how quickly we can reach answers to these questions.
I mean, I suppose one of the reasons whenever I'm talking with a lawyer about a solution that they've built, whether it's a big software product like CounterTax or Jennifer Longton's low-cost services or anything we talk about, I try to start from the question about what was the problem you're trying to solve and how did it evolve into this solution? Because I think that's where lawyers always need to start, is not, I need practice management software, which one should I buy? But what is the problem I'm trying to solve? Why do I think I need practice management software? What are the other possibilities out there? Should I be using index cards? or pen and paper or what, and then evaluating the potential solutions against each other, and then iterating on them in the way that you've done. Your iteration has led you down the path of software. It might not lead another firm down that path. So
Absolutely.
which is a whole different way of thinking about things, but although that I think fits nicely into the thinking like a lawyer box, if we let ourselves think like a lawyer about our law practices, not just about legal problems.
Yeah, you would do the same thing in court, right? Like you try one argument, and if it wasn't quite working, you're going to tweak it a little and you're going to try again. It's the exact
Assuming you
same
get another
thing.
chance.
Assuming you get another chance.
So what's next for Countermeasure?
More building, more refining. Like I said, we're trying to launch a commercial product this year. So we are deep into converting the tax module that we have into something that can be broadened out into other pieces of litigation as well.
So you're trying to systemize your systematization product.
You got it.
That is the project, the never-ending project. Very cool.
People can find more information and sign up for product updates and things like that on our website, which I think you'd mentioned earlier is countermeasure.legal.
And we'll stick it in the show notes too.
Absolutely, yeah. We're really grateful that the Financial Times actually just recognized Countermeasure and awarded the Standout Award for the Business of Law in Canada. And we were absolutely thrilled to be invited to participate in these awards. And it was a really, really wonderful experience.
Very cool. Well, congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being on the podcast and for letting me geek out on what you are geeking out on. It's a lot of fun to see what you guys are working on. I love the way you think about law practice and solving problems, and I hope our listeners took away a bunch of good stuff from it.
Wonderful. Well, anytime.
Thanks, Natalie.
Thanks. Bye.
Sure to catch next week's episode of the Lawyerist Podcast by subscribing to the show in your favorite podcast app. And please leave a rating to help other people find our show. You can find the notes for today's episode on lawyerist.com/podcast.
Lawyerist Podcast is produced with help from Lindsay Calhoun and edited by Paul Fisher. The views expressed by the participants are their own and are not endorsed by Legal Talk Network. Nothing said in this podcast is legal advice for you.